in view of how long our our cultures are going to last, are a sacred responsibility. Identity is multifaceted. Individuals use a large aggregate of criteria to identify who they are, who we are. The criteria, in other words, what do we use, may include, but not limited to, personal names, family, religion, nationality, race, skin color, specialties, and language. It may include hearing, seeing, politics, events, and land. And if you don't believe how important identity is, if I called you a different name, if I just came along and called Karen Susie, hey, you would be the first one to say, hey, I'm not Susie, I'm Karen. See? And think about the container. If you can think of the name we carry around as a box, and that box is full of everything that this being is. See? That's what, that's the importance of identity. And if we belong to a certain religion, and somebody says something bad, derogatory about the religion you belong to, again, you would be the first one to jump up and down to defend. See? Because that's part of you, that's part of that identity. All societies, at one time or another, lay claim to a territory. Within that territory, a culture arises from the natural relationships with the land. A culture consists of paradigms and so on. In other words, the esoteric aspects are beliefs and so on. It includes values and customs. But paradigms are what I refer to as the tacit infrastructure, the tacit aspects of our belief system. In other words, those tacit aspects of a culture are those things that are so embodied inside you that you don't even have to talk to anybody to explain. They become so much a part of you. So in other words, for instance, 2 + 2 = 4. Hey, you don't even have to think about it. It's such an important part of you. You don't have to explain anything about it. So tacit infrastructures are those things that are so much apart. And that, in other situations, is one of the foundational bases for all the ethnic, racial problems. Because, for instance, Europeans, they had their paradigms, they had their ways of thinking, and they take it for granted that everybody is the same. Well, on the other side, in Blackfoot, hey, I start to think that everybody looks at the world from a Blackfoot perspective, and that I don't have to explain it to you. And incidentally, let me just say, I'm speaking from a Blackfoot perspective because that's what I speak, that's what I was brought up in. I know this to be true in Cree, in Nakota, and so on, okay? So, but I'm speaking from a Blackfoot point of view because that's the culture I grew up in. Hundreds of generations of North American Indians have come and gone since before and after the last ice age. Through their mutual relationship with the land, they have developed icons, symbols, and images about the totality of the environment. Those icons, symbols, and images serve as repositories for the paradigms, values, and customs. In other words, our people, let's say like the Blackfoot, we've embodied those because we've developed a relationship with the land. And as I was telling another audience, talking about 150-year anniversary of Canada, hey, remember 50 years ago when Canada was 100 years old? What did Chief Dan George say? Well, look it up. He had a lament for Canada. Okay? Read it. And today, 150 years later, I think we can still read that lament for Canada, and it's still applicable. In other words, in terms of relationships, we haven't gone very far, so much. But the point we were making to the audience, that other audience, was, hey, all you have to do is go a few miles south of Calgary, south of Siksika Reserve, and you come to Majorville Medicine Wheel. Hey, that medicine wheel is probably 10,000 years old. We're not telling the rest of the story. We're not telling the rest of the story. All we're talking about is just 150 years when we're talking about Canada celebrating its 150 years. But here there's a whole story that the Blackfoot, for instance, can tell you. So if we're going to have truth and reconciliation, we have to tell the rest of the story. And that's what our people in this territory embody. Yes. To be knowledgeable about culture, one must have a good understanding of the paradigms or metaphysics of a culture if one is to transfer knowledge to children. Paradigms and metaphysics are the foundational basis of a society's way of thinking, beliefs, behavior, customs, and values. Let's look at the native paradigm, okay? And I can talk all day about that, but let me quickly just go through. Yes. The native paradigm consists of what I refer to as constant flux. In other words, in our way of thinking, everything is always in a state of motion. Everything is always in motion, changing all the time, disappearing, reappearing, and so on, transforming, and so on, okay? That's what flux is all about. And that's why I jokingly say, try try and make an appointment with a pagan, and he'll say, hey, we'll meet at 2 o'clock, but if I'm not there, I'm over at my uncle's. Okay? If you don't see my horse over there, I'm at my grandma's. See, in other words, in Western thought, time is the referent. See, in native thought, hey, things are always changing, and we don't know what's going to happen in the very next moment. So that's why sometimes, with tongue-in-cheek, I might accept an invitation to go to a conference, but the conference is 3 years away. And I usually tell the people, call me the week before, because I never know what's going to happen in between. So flux is part of the way of thinking. We think in terms of energy waves, pulse, and so on. In Western thought, we think in terms of matter, something that's tangible. In native ways, we're always thinking in terms of energy waves. Yes. In native ways of thinking, everything is animate. Everything has a spirit, okay? In Western way of thinking, the only thing that's animate is you and I, okay, humans. Those animals out there like the bison, the buffalo. But when it comes to plants, we're never sure. Some of us might say yes. Most of us might say no, plants are not animate. But a rock definitely is inanimate. But for us, native ways, I can talk to a rock. And if Peter heard me talking to a rock, he wouldn't think I was ready for Panoka. In fact, he'd probably join the conversation. Because our languages give spirit and animate status to rocks, the earth, and so on. We talk about all my relations. When we talk about all my relations, we're not talking about my human relations. I'm talking about those rocks. I'm talking about those trees and other beings out there. Those are all my relations. And for things to be in good order, everything has to be in harmony and so on. So when things are being talked about, what should we do and so on, it's not just humans that we talk about. We're also saying, hey, how is it going to affect those other animals out there? How is it going to affect, the land and so on? That's what all my relations is about. In other words, in native thought, everything is about relationships. Yeah. In native thought, everything is about renewal. We always have to renew things, okay? And the example that I've given over and over again with regard to renewal is something like a young couple that have been married for a while now, but one morning, the wife, not always the wife, but usually the wife, will tell her husband over morning cup of coffee, hey, you have changed. And the husband says, knowing something is coming, digs kind of his heels in and says, what do you mean I have changed? And she says, you know, when we were dating, when we were courting each other, you used to bring me the flowers. You used to bring me the gifts. You don't do that anymore. And he says, I married you, didn't I? If you just stop there, what is she talking about? She's talking about love. She's talking about the things that go with it. The renewal, the flowers, the gifts. See, it's about renewal. So love has to always be renewed. See? And so renewal is a very important aspect. And that's why, you know, in our ceremonies, probably the majority of our ceremonies are renewal ceremonies. We sing the same songs, we do the same ceremonies, we tell the same stories, we even tell the same jokes. You know, see, it's about renewal. Whereas in Western thought, the thinking is, been there, done, did it. See? In other words, if I'm in grade 3, and I ask a grade 1 question, the teacher will tell me, you should have known that in grade 1. See? Well, you should move on. See, been there, done, did it. In our way of thinking, you always have to renew things all the time. Our way of thinking is connected with land, with the territory, and so on. And that's why we always refer to the land. In Western thought, the major referent in the back of an English speaker is time. See? And time is not connected to land or to anything. See? It's an abstract concept. It's not connected. In our ways, land is the connection. And in our language, our Blackfoot language, let's say, is very process, action-oriented. Okay? Whereas in English, it is very noun-based language. It's for naming things and so on. It's a very good language for categorizations and so on, but it's not a very good language for process. And therefore, let's say in science, scientists also believe in terms of constant motion, flux we were talking about, but English can't quite explain what they're talking about, so they have to adopt a different language, and that different language is mathematics. See? Whereas in Blackfoot, you can explain all those processes because our way of thinking is very process-oriented. And I always throw this figure out. In this linguist actually did a count, and he was studying